It is no secret that the United States used torture in the years following 9/11. But today, the world learned exactly how often it used it and just how brutal it was. A Senate report details how it was so disturbing that some CIA officers tried to stop it, how the spy agency lied about what it was doing, and how, in the end, the torture produced nothing that helped disrupt terror plots or capture their leaders. Our senior Washington correspondent, Neil MacDonald, has more on this. Neil.
Well, Peter, America certainly isn't the first country to torture prisoners, but it's just about the only one to have investigated a shameful past so publicly.
My words give me no pleasure.
That the CIA tortured people after 9/11 has been known for years. Hollywood has already depicted the near-drowning technique called waterboarding, but it was worse than this, says the new Senate report.
The CIA's actions a decade ago are a stain on our value and on our history.
It's a complete turnaround from the post-9/11 days when the Bush administration secretly authorized torture, then denied practicing it.
We do not torture.
Oh, but America did torture, says the report. Furthermore, it was a lot more gruesome than is generally known. Amongst other things, the report says CIA torturers nearly killed some prisoners. They denied sleep for up to a week and inflicted what the report calls rectal rehydration and feeding. Some CIA officers, says the report, were moved to the point of tears and choking up by the cruelty they witnessed. Furthermore, it says the CIA lied to both Congress and the White House about the things it did in its secret foreign prisons. The report quotes a memo from CIA manager Jose Rodriguez asking employees not to engage in speculative language as to the legality of given activities, or more precisely, judgment calls as to their legality, especially in emails. And to top it off, says the report, the CIA exaggerated and lied to its political masters about the intelligence the torture produced.
Did we torture people? Yes. Did it work? No.
Republicans are generally more forgiving of the torture, and many opposed the report's release, but not Senator John McCain, who was himself cruelly tortured in Vietnam.
Most of all, I know the use of torture compromises that which most distinguishes us from our enemies, our belief that all people, even captured enemies, possess basic human rights.
President Obama publicly supported the report's release, but he also ordered U.S. forces worldwide to high alert, fearing reprisals. The extremists of ISIS, for example, already use waterboarding on their American captives as a form of revenge. Senator Feinstein acknowledged the possibility of retaliation.
We can't prevent that, but history will judge us by our commitment to a just society governed by law and the willingness to face an ugly truth and say never again.
As for the CIA, Peter, it has fought with and even investigated the Senate committee's research staff. The spy agency says that the report is full of half-truths and that no good will come of its publication. Former Vice President Dick Cheney went even further. He said that the torturers and other agents involved in the program should be decorated and not rebuked.
Neil, all of this leads to the question, will anyone be prosecuted for any of this?
Well, President Obama made it clear years ago that there will be no criminal charges, that the CIA was just following orders, if you will. But of course, yes, there will be consequences, Peter. Some newspapers here have already begun naming some of the torturers who were referred to by pseudonyms in the report, and also the countries that allowed the CIA to build its so-called black prisons on their soil. And that's going to be deeply unpleasant for the governments of Thailand or Poland or Romania, no matter how strenuously they may deny having participated in all this.
All right,
We'll
Neil, thank you.
intervene
Neil
whenever
MacDonald.
we decide it's in our national security interest to intervene. And if you don't like it, lump it.
The problem with America is not that we go around marauding around the world imposing ourselves. The problem with America in the last 10, 15 years, since the end of the Cold War, really in the last 60 years, is that we've been too slow to get involved.
I don't know how many Iraqi civilians were killed, but I can assure you that the number is the absolute minimal that it's possible in modern warfare.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
You know, that land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
Welcome to the Darkened Hour.
Welcome to another episode of the Darkened Hour. I'm your host, Adam Fitzgerald. I want to talk about the intelligence services, specifically the FBI and the CIA's investigation into the rendition and torture program, also known as the SERE program. Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape, headed by two CIA psychologists, Bruce Jessen and James Mitchell. In the immediate aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, the Department of State, the Department of Defense, the FBI, the CIA, began to run the extrajudicial process of capturing those involved with the attacks and their associates. And what precluded this was a 10-year sordid history of illegal renditions made legal by White House legal counsel and torture, which was given a fancy name of enhanced interrogation techniques, which was fully approved by the Bush White House, in which the responsibility fell on the Central Intelligence Agency. The investigation into those responsible began with the capture of Abu Zubaydah, and then later Ramzi bin al-Shibh, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and many others. The information that was procured from the severe and brutal methods, torturous methods, barbarity, would later be ruled inadmissible, that they couldn't use in a court of law, which leads one to believe, why would the CIA, knowing full well that torture does not work in procuring information, why did they do it in the first place? Rumor has it that this would actually cover up their illegal activity with Saudi intelligence in monitoring two al-Qaeda operatives inside the United States, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. The CIA would respond in kind by saying that torture methods were legal, thanks in part to the Bush White House. To go back, to understand the present, we have to go back in time. Just days after the 9/11 attacks, White House lawyers would draft a proposal that would give the Bush White House virtually unchecked authority and the ability to do virtually anything. Alberto Gonzales, who was the White House lead counsel, demanded that Congress expand on the president's authority even further than what was already agreed upon. Bush wanted to wage war against suspected terrorists abroad and even inside the United States. Later on, this would come back to bite the butts of those in the riots of January 6th. Congress, however, agreed on a compromise. Yes, They would give the president the authority to treat the war on terror as an armed conflict with very few legal boundaries. That Bush could use all necessary and appropriate forms to wage war against any nation harboring terrorists, whether they were persons or organizations determined by Bush himself that were part of the September 11 terrorist attacks. But isn't that the role of the Department of Justice? They are the ones who investigate terrorist actions. But on September 14, 2001, the Senate voted unanimously, 420 votes to 1, to expand on more unlimited war powers solely for the president. A secret White House memo from the Justice Department argued that in times of national emergency, if the president decides the threat justified deploying the military inside the United States, the president will be given authority to do so. This is dangerous times. And there's a reason why the media didn't cover this. Because they didn't want the public to know that the president would be the sole authority on determining who's a terrorist and who isn't. Despite the risks that third parties could be injured by exchanges of gunfire if they fought back, the government was given full approval to shoot down civilian airliners if they were hijacked by terrorists or by rogue elements. Even setting up military operations inside American cities. The two men who were influential in drafting these remarkable pieces of legislation were John Yoo, who was the deputy chief of the Justice Department, and Timothy Flanagan, lawyer for the White House Counsel Office. By the way, both men were active in the Federalist Society, which are a group of conservative lawyers who want to reestablish the original interpretation of the Constitution. Now, we're not even done, because both John Yoo and David Addington, who is Cheney's private lawyer, well, they wanted to authorize the fight against terrorism from a criminal justice matter to a military matter, thereby allowing the CIA and the Pentagon to capture or even kill terror suspects as quickly as possible with as much latitude as possible. In other words, they're going to be given full authority to execute who the president deems as a terrorist. Now, both Bush and Cheney made clear that they wanted to be aggressive with the law as the law would allow. This is where John Yoo comes in, because he would argue that no one could limit the method, timing, or place regarding the president's war on terror. And on October 25th, 2001, Vice President Dick Cheney called for a meeting with members of the Senate and House Intelligence Oversight Committee as he outlined a closely guarded plan from Bush that it was the terrorist surveillance program which allowed for the NSA to intercept all phone calls and other communications, including emails, from the United States without a goddamn word. Now, there would be vehement disagreement between the White House counsel and lawyers in the NSA about how to bypass U.S. laws regarding the privacy of everyday American citizens. Well, the White House later engaged with the NSA Director Michael Hayden about the need for the NSA to collect as much data as possible without the use of walls, which are there to protect us. Well, he was given the fucking green light. The president also heard from the CIA's own counterintelligence unit, headed by Cofer Black, in which the president allowed for the CIA to be given as much latitude as possible to rendition those he deemed as terrorists or threats to be terrorists. And he also authorized the CIA to conduct a kill list. Now, I'm not joking, guys. This really happened. And so in the next 7 years, the CIA, with help of the intelligence services abroad, as well as Afghan militias, would begin the process of collecting detainees through the rendition and torture program. These stories that would come out, leaked to the press from inside the White House, would show the barbarity, the inhumane conditions, the abrasive tactics used by the CIA to get information about future terrorist attacks. According to one report, the CIA was torturing Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and didn't even ask about 9/11. They were talking about future operations, in which Khalid Sheikh Mohammed gave information about plots that the CIA already knew. But yet the CIA would go on later to say that we helped stop plots. And Senator Dianne Feinstein called bullshit on that. And there was a report that was released on December 13, 2012, from the Committee Study of the Central Intelligence Agency's Detention and Interrogation Program, in which the report detailed actions by CIA officials, including torturing prisoners, providing misleading or false information about classified CIA programs to the President, Department of Justice, Congress, and the media, impending government oversight and internal criticism and mismanagement of the program. It also revealed the existence of previously unknown detainees, which were subjected to the enhanced interrogation techniques in Europe and in the Middle East. The report concluded that the use of enhanced interrogation techniques did not yield unique intelligence that saved lives, as the CIA would claim, nor was it fucking useful in gaining cooperation from detainees, and that the program even damaged the U.S. international standing. And still, the CIA would go on platforms like 60 Minutes and later claim that the CIA doesn't torture people. Now, it's amazing to me that even with all the evidence showing that there were these mysterious rendition planes capturing people all around the Middle East and Europe, and then bringing them back to countries like Germany, Poland, and Afghanistan, and Iraq, and Lithuania to be tortured. It was no longer a conspiracy, it was a matter of fact. So 60 Minutes brought on George Tenet to talk about the program.
You know, the image that's been portrayed is we sat around the campfire and said, oh boy, now we go get to torture people. Well, we don't torture people. Let me say that again to you. We don't torture people. Okay?
Come on, George.
We don't torture people.
Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
We don't torture people.
Waterboarding.
We do not. I don't talk about
torture.
techniques, and we don't torture people. Now listen to me. I want you to listen to me. So the context is it's post 9/11. I've got reports of nuclear weapons in New York City, apartment buildings that are going to be blown up, planes that are going to fly into airports all over again, plot lines that I don't know. I don't know what's going on inside the United States, and I'm struggling to find out where the next disaster is going to occur.
Where did that come from? When's the next disaster? Well, the initial disaster was the attacks of September 11, 2001, in which could have been prevented had information been shared by the CIA to the FBI or to the Department of State regarding Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. But because the CIA was already breaking the law in regards to monitoring inside the country, which they're not allowed to do, with even a foreign entity in Saudi Arabia, let alone what Israel was doing. So this called for an investigation. Now, California Senator Dianne Feinstein said that the initial investigation began after press reports emerged stating that in 2005, the CIA director of the National Clandestine Service, Jose Rodriguez, destroyed about 100 video recordings of interrogations over objections from the CIA and White House legal staff, including the waterboarding of Abu Zubaydah and Abd al-Rahim al-Nashiri. And of course, the CIA did not inform the United States Senate Select Committee on Intelligence that Jose Rodriguez had destroyed the tapes. Now, why didn't they say that? Because they didn't want them to know that there was illegal practices to gather, to gain intelligence. Rodriguez preemptively criticized the report in an op-ed for the Washington Post in 2014, but he wasn't alone. Director of the CIA, John Brennan, would also criticize the report predictably. Here's what the scumbag had to say in regards to the report.
There were no easy answers. And whatever your views are on EITs, our nation, and in particular this agency, did a lot of things right during this difficult time to keep this country strong and secure. There were times when CIA officers exceeded the policy guidance that was given and the authorized techniques that were approved and determined to be lawful. They went outside of the bounds in terms of their actions as part of that interrogation process. And they were harsh. As I said, in some instances, I consider them abhorrent. And I will leave to others how they might want to label those activities. But for me, it was something that is certainly regrettable, but we are not a perfect institution. Detainees who were subjected to EITs at some point during their confinement subsequently provided information that our experts found to be useful and valuable in our counterterrorism efforts. And the cause and effect relationship between the application of those EITs and the ultimate provision of the information is unknown and unknowable. But for someone to say that there was no intelligence of value, of use, that came from those detainees once they were subjected to EITs, I think that lacks any foundation at all. This agency went back and forth with Justice, with the White House to make sure that there was clear understanding of what were going to be the approved enhanced interrogation techniques and how they should be applied. I said we were not prepared, and the individuals that were given the responsibility to carry out this work early on were ones that were trying to do their best, and I think at times came up short.
Bull fucking shit. The 6,700-page report produced 20 key findings. And they were: 1, the CIA's use of its enhanced interrogation techniques was not an effective means of acquiring intelligence on gaining cooperation from detainees. 2, the CIA's justification for its use of its enhanced interrogation techniques rested on inaccurate claims of their effectiveness. 3, the interrogations of CIA detainees were brutal and far worse than the CIA represented to policymakers and others. 4. The conditions of confinement for CIA detainees were harsher than the CIA had represented to policymakers and others. 5. The CIA reportedly provided inaccurate information to the Department of Justice, impeding a proper legal analysis of the CIA's detention and interrogation program. 6. The CIA has actively avoided or impeded congressional oversight of the program. 7. The CIA impeded effective White House oversight and decision-making. 8. The CIA's operation and management of the program complicated and in some cases impeded the national security missions of other executive branch agencies. 9. The CIA impeded oversight by the CIA's Office of the Inspector General, which we're going to get into. 10. The CIA coordinated the release of classified information to the media, including inaccurate information concerning the effectiveness of the CIA's enhanced interrogation techniques. 11. The CIA was unprepared as it began appealing its detention and interrogation program more than 6 months after being granted detention authorities. 12. The CIA's management and operation of its detention and interrogation program was deeply flawed throughout the program's duration, particularly in the years 2002 and 2003. 13. 2 contract psychologists, James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen, devised the CIA's enhanced interrogation techniques and played a central role in the operation, amassments, and management of the CIA's detention and interrogation program. And by 2005, the CIA had overwhelmingly outsourced operations related to the program to unqualified subjects. 14. CIA detainees were subject to coercive interrogation techniques that had not been approved by the Department of Justice or had not been authorized by CIA headquarters. Rogue elements, anyone? 15. The CIA did not conduct a comprehensive or accurate accounting of the number of individuals it detained and even held individuals who did not meet the legal standard for detention. 16. The CIA failed to adequately evaluate the effectiveness of the enhanced interrogation technique program. 17. CIA rarely reprimanded or held personnel accountable for serious or significant violations, inappropriate activities, and systematic and individual management failures, including the death of Gul Rahman. 18. The CIA marginalized and ignored numerous internal critiques, criticisms, and objections concerning the operation and management of the CIA's detention and interrogation program. 19. The CIA's detention and interrogation program was inherently unsustainable and had effectively ended by 2006 due to unauthorized press disclosures, reduced cooperation from other nations, and legal and oversight concerns. And finally, 20. The CIA's detention and interrogation program damaged the United States' standing in the world and resulted in other significant monetary and non-monetary costs. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you would think that after this scathing bipartisan report would reverberate throughout the CIA and firings would begin. No. In fact, the fucking opposite happened. George Tenet, the director of the CIA, was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom. George Bush, the idiot son of CIA Director George H.W. Bush, had this to say about the CIA torture report.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you at some point in this interview about the Senate Intelligence Committee report that's coming out sometime next week about the CIA and what it did during your era.
Yeah, I haven't seen the report.
I haven't either. I would expect it will be somewhat critical.
But I'll tell you this. Well, first of all, as I understand, it'll be critical, but there's also going to be a report of a counter report coming out of the agency. Here's what I'm going to say. That we're fortunate to have men and women who work hard at the CIA serving on our behalf. These are patriots. And whatever the report says, if it diminishes their contributions to our country, it is way off base. And I knew the directors, I knew the deputy directors, I knew a lot of the operators. These are good people, really good people, and we're lucky as a nation to have them.
Sure enough, tell that to the detainees. Now, I had the privilege and honor of interviewing two former Guantanamo Bay detainees, Mohamedou Al-Slahi and Mansour Adaifi. Both men were subjected to many years of torture, physical and mental. They were not given a sorry letter. And that follow-up report that George Bush was talking about is the Office of the Inspector General report on CIA accountability with respect to the 9/11 attacks. Now, the executive summary states that the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence requested that the CIA's Office of the Inspector General review the findings of the Joint Inquiry Report and undertake whatever additional investigations were necessary to determine whether any agency employees were deserving of awards for outstanding service provided before the 9/11 attacks, or should be held accountable for failure to perform their responsibilities in a satisfactory manner. Now, this is a lot different than the torture report. And this, I'm sorry, I said that this was the follow-up report. It wasn't. But this was the report in regards to intelligence sharing. And that this report basically was run by the Accountability Review Team, assembled by the Inspector General, which focused exclusively on the issues identified by the Joint Inquiry, which were intelligence failures. This would lead to detainees to give information to the CIA to try to appease their torturers, where the CIA actually believed that this information was actionable, but in reality, it wasn't. In fact, the CIA's Counterterrorism Center knew that the information precluding in these forced confessions knew that they couldn't be acted upon, but they lied about it anyway. Now, the report was designed to address accountability issues. It does not include recommendations relating to the systematic problems that were identified. And after concluding its review, the Inspector General team reports that while its findings differ from those of the Joint Inquiry on a number of matters, it reached the same overall conclusion on most of the important issues. Concerning certain issues, the team concluded that the agency and its officers did not discharge their responsibilities in a satisfactory manner. And as a result, the Inspector General recommended that the Director, Central Intelligence Agency, establish an accountability board made up of individuals who are not employees of the agency to review the performance of some individuals and assess their potential accountability. Then came the torture report, which was a scathing critique. And just to give you some examples of what the CIA did in regards to the enhanced interrogation techniques, which followed up the failures of intelligence. Some examples were like the CIA had force-fed some prisoners orally or anally in order to establish total control of the detainee, self-debasement. Some detainees were subject to rectal rehydration. Detainees like Abu Zubaydah, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and Majid Khan. One prisoner was diagnosed with chronic hemorrhoids and an anal fissure, and that was Mustafa al-Hassawi. because the CIA had anally raped them with what seemed to be a metal pipe. What the fuck is wrong with the CIA? Everything, it seems. I mean, who is in charge of conducting an anal rape of an individual and said, I'm doing a good thing for the United States of America. Go, America, go. But when you look at the whole history of the CIA, you'll notice that it's actually an immoral entity that is deserving of being broken into the thousand winds. But that didn't stop future presidents and, at the time, current senators to critique the CIA's report. I mean, they were coming out of the fucking woodworks, both Republican and Democrat. One such critique came from notable war criminal himself and also an abuser of U.S. citizens' rights, and basically was just an extension of the Bush administration, Barack Obama.
I think overall, the men and women at the CIA do a really tough job, and they do it really well. And that was true then, and it's true today. But in the aftermath of 9/11, I think in the midst of a national trauma and uncertainty as to whether these attacks were going to repeat themselves, what's clear is that the CIA set up something very fast without a lot of forethought to what the ramifications might be, that the lines of accountability that needed to be set up weren't always in place, and that some of these techniques that were described were not only wrong, but also counterproductive.
Now on to the FBI. In May of 2008, the Oversight and Review Division, the Office of the Inspector General of the U.S. Department of Justice, released a 500-page report, approximately, called A Review of the FBI's Involvement in and Observations of Detainee Interrogations in Guantanamo Bay, Afghanistan, and Iraq, in which the conclusions were as follows: that beginning in December of 2001, the FBI sent a small number of agents and other employees to Afghanistan to obtain actionable intelligence for its counterterrorism efforts, primarily by interviewing detainees at various Department of Defense and CIA facilities. One such example was Abu Zubaydah. FBI agent Ali Soufan had traveled to Afghanistan to interview Abu Zubaydah after a gunfight, in which CIA case officer John Kiriakou, who I interviewed, was in that firefight with Abu Zubaydah. So the FBI had the first crack at him. And they were going somewhere. They didn't brutally mishandle him. They didn't verbally abuse him. In fact, Ali Soufan nursed his wounds, in which Abu Zubaydah suffered in the gunfight. But the CIA found out. And as usual, the scumbag director, George Tenet, complained to George Bush. And the CIA took over the case of Abu Zubaydah. In fact, one of the first things they did was build a makeshift coffin, put Abu Zubaydah in it for 48 hours, filled with bugs, spiders, because they knew he was afraid of enclosed areas and bugs and spiders. I mean, this agency is a piece of shit. I don't think I need to repeat it. But let's continue. January 20, 2002, the military began transferring illegal enemy combatants from Afghanistan to Guantanamo Bay. And the FBI began deploying personnel to Guantanamo Bay to obtain intelligence and evidence from detainees who were in cooperation with military interrogators. One of them was Mohammed al-Slahi, who had nothing to do with 9/11, but they tortured him for 16 years anyway. Following the invasion of Iraq in March of 2003, the FBI sent agents and other employees to Iraq with the whole primary objective of collecting and analyzing information to help protect against terrorist threats in the United States. The FBI deployments in the military zones peaked anywhere between 25 employees in Afghanistan, 30 at Guantanamo Bay, and about 60 in Iraq. And the FBI's policies regarding detainee interrogations were as follows: that prior to May 19th of 2004, the FBI did not issue any formal written policies to its agents regarding FBI interviews of detainees in the military zones. In fact, many FBI agents told the Inspector General that they were instructed to comply with existing FBI policies for custodial interviews in the United States, except for providing Miranda warnings. These FBI policies, which prohibit agents from attempting to obtain statements by force, threats, or even promises, which reflect constitutional considerations of voluntariness as a condition of preserving the legal inadmissibility of statements in judicial proceedings. Because the FBI knew that any information, whether it was true or not, could not be held against the detainee because it was procured through an act of violence. However, existing FBI interrogation policies did not address the difficult issues confronted by agents in the military zones, such as what agents should do when they observe an interrogator from another agency, CIA, using techniques that are permissible for the FBI. And so on May 19, 2004, shortly after the detainee abuses in Abu Ghraib, the FBI issued a policy instructing its agents to remove themselves from any interview in which non-FBI interrogators use techniques not in compliance with the FBI rules. Did that stop the FBI from questioning detainees in which they knew were being subjected to torture? No. Years later, this would come out to be true that the FBI, quote unquote, participated or allowed for the tortured detainees, just as long as they're the ones asking the questions. Now, with the CIA's detention and interrogation program in full swing, the hunt for those who masterminded the 9/11 attacks, the Saudi and Israeli intelligence units inside the United States now gone, and this report that basically criticized both Bruce Jessen and James Mitchell and the entire Central Intelligence Agency. But yet, nobody was fired, nobody was held in reprimand, or even given a suspension of fucking pay. Stories would come out of former detainees who were released about the brutal methods the CIA used. And I got to tell you, it's some of the worst stuff I ever heard in my life. And I'm a very stoic person. When you read the torture methods of what these people did, just go read the committee study of the program itself. Now, what does this mean for the rest of us, the common people? Well, with the State Department, through its White House legal counsel, They have made it to where the Department of Justice and the Attorney General do not have wartime powers. The president will have wartime powers, which means that power is consolidated. Laws are broken. And God knows what type of abrasiveness and illegality the U.S. government could have in the future. And I would say that after the report was released, you would think that those involved would think back and say, you know, we made a mistake. We should have never been involved with a program like that. But that didn't stop James Mitchell from voicing his opinion about the program to Vice in a 2018 report. And it went something like this.
To me, it seems completely insensible that slapping KSM is bad, but sending a Hellfire missile into her family's picnic and killing all their children and, you know, killing Granny and killing everyone is okay for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is, what about that collateral loss of life? And the other one is that if you kill them, you can't question them. It was to facilitate getting actionable intelligence by making a bad cop that was bad enough that the person would engage with the good cop. I don't feel particularly like I was thrown under the bus. You know, not by, I feel that way about the Democrats in the Senate, right? But I don't feel that way about any of the other organizations that I worked with. I do think that my credentials have been misrepresented. Give me just a second here. What he said was, if you're not willing to do it, how can we ask anybody else? And I kind of thought back to all those people that died for no reason. And so I was willing to help any way I could. You know, when somebody asked me if I would be willing to help, I was willing to help.
I was only following orders. That's what Hermann Göring said, the head of the Luftwaffe of Nazi Germany. You know, when the Abu Ghraib story broke out, the Department of Defense, through its director, Donald Rumsfeld, basically pledged his allegiance to even expanding the CIA's torture program to newer heights. This would be reformatted time and time again. It wasn't like this was a one-off. Torture program was given more and more leniency to do whatever the fuck they wanted to do to these poor people. Now, look, I'm not defending Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. I'm not defending Ramzi bin al-Shibh. But to do unto them what they have done to us is not providing any type of justice. We have become them. In fact, in most cases, we're worse because the response to the 9/11 attacks has been to invade a country on an illegal pretense. And what happened was in 2003, June of 2003, the United States invaded Iraq. And what led to this invasion, I'm sorry, May of 2003, what led to the invasion, what gave it the right? Well, it was the torture confession of one Ibn Sheikh al-Libi, in which the Egyptians, with the full authority of the CIA, to torture this guy, to basically say, yes, the Iraqi Ba'athist Army and its government were procuring chemical and biological weapons along with Al Qaeda. The Secretary of State, Colin Powell, went with this information unvetted by the CIA and said, this is what's going on. And they put, you remember those cartoons that they showed about these underground caves that didn't exist. And imagine this. Before the United Nations Security Council, Colin Powell is showing fucking cartoons. Looney Tune shit. To go to war against a country that had nothing to do with 9/11. And so they did. Killing approximately 1.3 million Iraqis in the process, which led to 2 civil wars, the destruction of the infrastructure. Thank you, L. Paul Bremer, through his Iraqi Provisional Orders number 1 and number 2, which liquidated the army and the police. And without an army and police, you have anarchy. This created the vacuum for Al Qaeda in Iraq, headed by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. Don't tell me that U.S. foreign policymakers did not become aware or was not told in advance what this could lead to, because they were given a lot of options on how to handle the situation in Iraq. But because they wanted to blame Iraq for the 93 World Trade Center bombing, they wanted to blame Iraq in regards to the embassy bombings. And who is this element? Well, the neoconservatives, headed by Richard Pearl, Douglas Feith, Paul Wolfowitz, Scooter Libby. Which created the Office of Special Plans, which was a special office made for a specific group of people, not for the Attorney General, not for the Secretary of State, and not for the National Security Advisor, actual government officials, but to these rogue elements like Douglas Feith and Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Armitage to come up with a summary of how they can blame Iraq for the 9/11 attacks. I mean, when you look at this from a broader perspective, you'll notice that the United States government is evil in its entirety. There's no saving it. And the only country on the face of the earth that has a fucking pair is Malaysia, of all countries. The same Malaysia where there was a Al Qaeda summit meeting in January of 2000. Professor Gwandil Singh Nijjar, who headed the prosecution, stated that the tribunal was very careful to adhere scrupulously to the regulations drawn up by the Nuremberg courts and the International Criminal Courts. And who did they name as those who are guilty of war crimes? George Bush, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, even their legal advisors like Alberto Gonzalez, David Addington, John Yoo, William Haynes, and John Bybee. They were all tried in absentia in Malaysia. And the trial was held in Kuala Lumpur. A lot of people don't know about this. And they heard from eyewitness accounts from victims of torture in Iraq and Afghanistan, which included testimony from Mozambique, who's on Twitter, who was an ex-Guantanamo detainee, as well as an Iraqi woman named Jamdia Abba Hamidi, who survived torture in the Abu Ghraib prison. And after a week of hearings, of testimony, the 5-panel tribunal in Malaysia unanimously declared all those I named guilty.